There is a dangerous trend towards right-wing populism right across the world. I guess the issue of migration is the important one, and I'm quite appalled by the language that we often hear from those that want to turn the UK into an insular place. Quite frankly, we are enriched by migration, economically, socially and culturally, and those of us that believe in those liberal values have got a responsibility to stand up and speak out for them.
Was a significant issue during the EU referendum campaign. And firstly, let me recognise that the issue of immigration is a difficult one for politicians and governments in countries across the world, including, of course, in this one right now. But equally, in my view, too few politicians have the courage to make the positive case for immigration. Immigration has been good for our culture, our economy and for our society as a whole. In fact, for Scotland, it is absolutely essential. As I said a moment ago, without it, our population will start to decline. And everybody knows the consequences of that. A smaller number of working age people will have to support a growing number of older people. So severe restrictions on immigration pose a genuine risk to the long-term health of our economy and our society. And one of the things that I personally find hardest to accept in relation to the UK government's Brexit policy is that they see ending freedom of movement as a good thing. I don't believe that's true for any part of the UK, and it's certainly not true for Scotland. In fact, the central trade-off at the heart of the UK's approach to Brexit makes absolutely no sense to us at all. By impeding free trade in order to end freedom of movement, the UK is in the bizarre, absurd position of doing something that will harm the UK and Scotland in order to do something else that will harm the UK and Scotland. The worst impacts of climate change are not largely felt within developed nations. It is one of the huge injustices of climate change that it's usually developing countries who've done least to cause the problem who pay the heaviest price, which is why the Scottish Government a few years ago established a climate justice fund, helping countries in Africa adapt to the consequences of climate change and develop in a sustainable way.
Yeah. When it comes to immigration, the United Nations' very own progressive guru, Sturgeon, will spend 10 or so minutes praising the concept, with the proverbial cringe-inducing bile, and then we'll spend the remainder of our allocated time insisting that a cataclysmic implosion will await us all if we don't embrace the idea of mass migration. Not once does she allude to raising the birth rate. It seems to be exempt from all discussion, as if nobody has the capability of procreation, as if infertility was a rife issue in Scotland. The impending doom could easily be halted or eased by incentivising family creation, but it's never once mentioned. It would be bizarre if it weren't for the fact that the UN want depopulation. It would be bizarre if it weren't for the fact that the UN push man-made carbon-induced climate change. A consequence of such will, of course, be a driving factor for mass migration, or so that's what they tell us. How convenient that low birth rates, luckily, will be solved, as climate change will deliver a multitude of people right to our doors. And then, of course, there's the rise of AI and the need for a reduction in so-called carbon footprints across the West. They also seem to be excluded from the discussion, as well as they seem to both raise questions that could lead to scepticism in the need for mass migration. Are we expected to believe that these people won't have children of their own? Or are we expected to believe that when these people grow old themselves, we'll just import more? Why is it that the benefits and the wonders of mass demographic, cultural, changing immigration that Helmet Head refers to are identical to what the UN say on a multitude of occasions when talking about their sustainable development targets and the need to change the discourse, etc., etc. And then, of course, there's this. Scotland's population apparently being at a record high despite birth rates being at record lows, with migration being championed as the reason for this population growth. And the push for more of the same is a consistent theme from Rainbow Unicorn Land's First Minister. The same can't be said, of course, for the record low birth rates. There's no concern directed at these findings, no mention of looking into the causes, nor is there any suggestions to rectify the issue. All things that you would expect to see and or hear if, by their own admission, are really concerns that they all have. But then, of course, reality hits, because their solution is immigration. You know, the changing face of Scotland's newly found diversity that's enriching our societies. the population and demographic changes that they occasionally refer to, which are never elaborated on. What do they mean by changing populations? Why are they not trying to reverse these trends? Why do they never mention these trends publicly and openly, unless it's part of yet another embarrassing immigration speech? The same reason that they sat on their hands 20 years ago, when projections showed declining birth rates would emerge 20 years later, meaning now, if things remained as they were. Those findings, of course, included within the paper called Replacement Migration. What a fucking coincidence, eh? It would be easy to just scapegoat helmet heads feminism as the root cause, but remember, Sustainable Goal 5 is gender equality. So the UN, again, pushing all of this, and it's the useful idiots and the puppets who are to be scapegoated.